Welcome to the Deep Dive.
Emerald City Hockey's Seattle Kraken podcast.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Deep Dive, Emerald City Hockey's Seattle Kraken podcast. And RJ, it is a new year. It is officially the league year for the NHL of 25-26 here on July 1st.
Yes, it is. I mean, here's to new beginnings, I guess, for the Seattle Kraken in the league year. It doesn't feel like the calendar is totally turned over because we just had a busy day at Kraken Dev Camp. We saw the players on the ice. And of course, yes, we're looking at the young kids, at the prospects, the future, but it does still kind of feel like a continuation of the season. Our offseason starts as soon as Dev Camp is over. That's kind of when I feel like it starts, Dylan. And also a busy day for the Kraken. Lots of moves to talk about and still very busy as far as their offseason and the moves they're making.
Yeah, no, there's lots of stuff that we have to catch up on, not just from today, but really in this past week as our first glimpses of what Jason Bottrell's overhaul of this roster really is. We more or less have it now. We'll talk about whether or not we think a lot more is going to happen. I know a lot of fans maybe want some more to happen.
Or the extent to which it's actually an overhaul or not.
Yes, and that too. There's a lot of discussions that have to take place around that. We'll also, of course, catch up on the draft from this past weekend. But as we celebrate this new year, RJ, I can't think of any better way to usher in another year of the Deep Dive podcast, thanking our wonderful sponsor, the law offices of Rico Tessendor. And doesn't it feel nice to also be back up here? Well, maybe not for you today, actually, very specifically just today, but I was gonna say, does it feel better driving up here knowing that you have the security of if something went wrong, you would have Rico there to have your back versus back when we were driving downtown to go to the draft?
Well, you know what? It would if my drive from Climate Pledge Arena to home didn't take an hour and 20 minutes today. It was rush hour traffic, but man, I don't think I ever got up to a speed where I was in danger of having an accident and having to call Rico. So I guess thankful in a way for that, but good to know if I ever did go fast enough to the point where I could have gotten an accident. I got Rico's got my back.
Yeah, if you could go faster than 15 miles an hour or whatever you were doing. At any point did you consider just pulling over parking, pulling out your skates and just skating home?
I thought about it. I honestly thought about it. If you just gave me my pair of rollerblades and I didn't have to worry about where my car was at Climate Pledge Arena today, I could have gotten home faster than I did driving.
I think you could have as well. But yes, Rico, wonderful sponsor of the podcast as always. And while we hope none of you ever need his services, the odds say at some point someone out there will be driving faster than 15 miles an hour, hopefully. And if you're involved
Believe it
in
when
an
I see
accident,
it.
yeah, if you're involved in an accident, whether on the road, at work, or anywhere in between, if you are, we hope you call Rico at 425-778-9800 or visit his website, ricotessendor.com, to schedule a free consultation. He's won millions of dollars for his clients and helped thousands of people in the greater Seattle area. And as a fellow member of the ECH community, we know he'll help you too. Now, RJ, before we dive into Jason Bottrell and the Kraken roster overhaul ? We should catch up on the draft, which we were at, and it was this past weekend, and it was something to be at. Let me tell you. I know lots of you got to experience it watching at home. Decentralized draft. It's never happening again. That's, I guess, the best takeaway that we can have from it.
Yes, hallelujah. Thank goodness the league is never going to do this again because it was really bad. And if you were wondering, because we have gotten this question from people before, I watched it on TV. It was really bad. How was it in person? We can tell you it was worse. It was worse. It was more awkward. It felt more drawn out and long. Just terrible, terrible execution on this format. I think terrible format to begin with. So good riddance. I don't think the league will ever do this again, and it's going to be better off for it.
Let me tell you, this has been something I've long thought. If you feel secondhand embarrassment watching something on screen, let me tell you, secondhand embarrassment in person, way worse. And there was plenty of that at the NHL draft. Oh, it was absolutely brutal. That being said, you know, it wasn't brutal, RJ. What the Seattle Kraken were able to do at the draft, able to take Jake O'Brien with the 8th overall pick, trade up, get a player like Blake Fiddler, who just about everybody had as a first round talent. You're able to get him on day 2 towards the start of the second round. And then several more kind of enticing defensive prospects throughout the rest of the draft there, and some other guys. But I thought this was actually a really, really good draft for the Seattle Kraken and a great start to Jason Bottrell's tenure with his first draft in charge.
Agreed completely. And I think O'Brien and Fiddler, we're going to look back as the cornerstones of this draft and the great players you're getting. And beyond that, you just take a bunch of dart throws at mostly defensemen, which I like them addressing that position of need in their prospect pool. And, when you get down to the third round and below, a lot of it is just on the development staff. And, you kind of just, again, throw darts at the dartboard here. But you're leaving with two players that I think you certainly gave first round grades, and with Jake O'Brien, a very high first round grade as well.
Mhm.
So that's what the Kraken can be excited about. But I think a lot of the focus is going to be on that Jake O'Brien pick, eighth overall. We were kind of counting down the picks, looking at the big board, wondering who was still going to be left. With how it shook out, how do you feel about that pick?
It was the absolute perfect pick, right? This was a draft that kind of had 8 players at the top. The Kraken were picking 8th. In theory, one person was going to be left for them to have, and there was a lot of debate going in. Was the need for a lot of the teams in front of Seattle, their need for center is going to mean that Porter Martone was going to fall to them? Almost did, going at 6 to the Philadelphia Flyers. That would have been cool. But Jake O'Brien is a player that I thought had the highest, if hockey IQ of anybody in this draft. Something that I think is the most important quality for a hockey player to have. Somebody that I know in the scouting circles very well respected for his offensive creativity, his playmaking ability, just the ability to drive offense, involve everybody in the offensive zone, make plays happen. Somebody who was an assist per game player last year at the OHL level as a 17-year-old. He only turned 18 15 days ago from time of recording right now. So he's very much on the younger side compared to a lot of the guys who were taken before him. This was very much a draft that at the top was stacked with people that were late birthdays, late '06 birthdays, I think.
Mhm.
To be able to get a player like Jake O'Brien, who has his offensive skill set, his creativity, his hockey IQ, at 8th in a draft, I think is a steal.
Right, and I think you saw that a little bit last year with a Berkeley Catton, where just it's very rare to have that kind of production in junior hockey and fall all the way to the eighth pick. Now, of course, with Berkeley Catton, we know size is a pretty big concern
Mhm.
for him, and it still is in his development, right? But with Jake O'Brien, I'm wondering, okay, where's the catch? Why is he getting down here so far, right? He's 6'2". And yes, he is pretty slight. We've seen him in person. But as you've told me, like his frame can hold weight. You shouldn't be worried about that at all. And so I just don't see where the concern is that he would drop to 8. I know there's some other good players in this draft class, but I just don't see how he falls that far. And so if he is there, you got to take him, right? I mean, a 6'2" center who puts up 98 points in the OHL in his draft year, that doesn't come along too often at pick number 8. So I love the pick. I know there were some people asking us though about, well, why didn't they take a defenseman? They've gone forward. In fact, they've gone center with all of their top 10 picks in franchise history. But I think you have to go with best player available. That's always been the Kraken's philosophy drafting. I think that's the correct philosophy. And I mean, Dylan, do you have any hesitation about going with Jake O'Brien over, say, maybe like a Radim Murtka who was picked with the very next pick?
Not at all. I had them graded so differently. Like there was a big skill gap in my mind on most people's boards as well. There was a big skill gap between those two. I think a lot of the people that had mocked a Mertka or a different defenseman, maybe a Jackson Smith to Seattle, were strictly looking at what the organizational's prospect pool need was rather than really considering who the best player on the board could be for the Seattle Kraken. And I think that this is an example of a team being smart and taking the best player available, because the one thing that sinks franchises so fast, RJ, is trying to address maybe immediate needs through the draft, through your first round pick, especially if it's a top 10 pick. Like you have to make sure when you are drafting in the top 10 that you are getting a player that is not only going to pan out and become an NHL player, because that's not guaranteed, but that you're getting somebody who can make a difference for your franchise, can make a difference for your organization, because you're only going to be able to draft up there so long. and you need to make sure that those kids that you take are going to be able to turn into real studs for your franchise and be able to lift you out of the basement, out of the other side. They can become a part of a core that you build around and have a lot of long-term success with. And so I love them going with Jake O'Brien. I think he was absolutely the right pick. Yes, his frame can carry more weight. I know there's concerns on kind of the defensive side of his game. There's definitely face-off concerns. Saw Ron Francis at Dev Camp today come out, put on some skates, hop over the boards, and went out there and started working with the centerman. Spent a lot of time with Jake O'Brien, working with him on faceoffs. Look, faceoffs is one of those things that you can work at, you can improve on. This is something that is very coachable. His vision, his hockey sense, the fact that he knows where everybody is on the ice at any given time, and that he can make plays in tight with defenders all over him. He can go to the interior and still flash his hands, either scoring a goal or making a just a thread the needle type pass. That's the analogy I'm looking for. I had like every other analogy go through my brain. Um, the fact that he can do those in tight, right in front of a goalie, right there in the crease, tells me that this is somebody that just has special ability, and you just can't afford to pass that up. If you're concerned about faceoffs, teach him to be better on faceoffs. You can't teach somebody to do the other things that Jake O'Brien does. And yes, as far as having all of the centers, I think, and we can maybe talk about this later when we get to like the roster questions and everything. I look at kind of where the Kraken are at with all of these centers that they have taken in the top 10. And look, Matty Beniers, it's been a while. We kind of know what NHL player he's going to be. We knew at the draft back in 2021 that his offensive ceiling was pretty capped. That's just not who he is as a player. And so we know that there's room, with that pick for a centerman who can come in and really be an offensive stud and superstar. Shane Wright, it's been an up and down journey with him. He's going to have a big, chance to break out potentially this season. We'll see what he's able to do. But again, somebody who likes to focus on the two-way aspects of the game out there. And then Berkeley Catton, there's those size concerns. There's the fact that he doesn't play to the interior a lot. I think there's a lot of things that kind of point towards him at least starting on the wing, and I think potentially staying there longer term for the Kraken. So even though it says center next to his name, I don't know how much that's actually there. Jake O'Brien is really the first center that the Kraken have drafted that you look at his draft year and you're just like, yeah, that's a guy who's just going to purely create offense for you and be able to go out there and just produce a bunch of points.
Yeah, that's ultimately, I think, what the Kraken need. You take a step back and look at, I know, they are lacking a little bit on the blue line as far as their prospect pool, but what do they need long term more than anything else? It is a difference making, offensive producing forward, preferably a center. That's what they need. And I think Jake O'Brien gives you the best chance of someone who can turn into that player of anybody who's on the board. And it's not particularly close for me.
Right, exactly. So I love this pick. I had him higher than eighth on my big board. He was somebody I was really hoping would be available for the Kraken and that they could go with because I value that hockey sense. In addition to that, yes, he's 6'2". He's about 170 right now. Lots of room to add weight. Working with Gary Roberts, though, which is the best person in the world that you could be working with. And I know internally, because of the articles from both Jeff Baker and Bob Condor for the Kraken website, talking to people within the organization about Jake O'Brien, why he was their pick. They really do feel like he can add weight, add strength. He has the good mentality for all of that kind of stuff. And so shout out to the two of them for the good work they did covering all these draft picks over on the Kraken's website, and teaching us about that. And then, of course, also, he's got the pedigree, RJ. Right? Obviously, his mom, big time hockey player. She played on Canada's women's team. She was able to play some semi-pro hockey back in the day. His dad made it through the university level playing hockey. And then his grandfather was the first overall pick in the Canadian Football League draft back in 1966 and went on to win a Grey Cup in the CFL. Kid comes from athletes. He understands the work that it's going to take to be successful as a pro because he's seen it for multiple generations in front of him. I just think everything, he just checks so many boxes. I think is a great pick.
Yeah, and talking to him too after the draft, he doesn't have, I guess, the most outgoing personality
Mhm.
necessarily, but he seems like a very serious person in a good way. It's someone who takes his work and his job as a player really seriously, and so I like that kind of mentality that we've seen from him as well. And you know what? On top of things, He's a big fisher. He loves to go out
Yep.
fishing on the lake. He said he caught a 46-incher at one point and he threw it back. So he does have experience throwing fish, which I think might come in handy as a member of the Seattle Kraken.
Yep, that he does. And if we're just going to list everything about him, right-handed shot as well, which could be pretty valuable for this organization. Not too many of them in there. That's one of the reasons why Shane Wright is so enticing for the Seattle Kraken, just being a right shot centerman there. Speaking of though lineages and pedigrees, we could move on to their next draft pick, and that of course being Blake Fiddler, defenseman, coming from the Edmonton Oil Kings in the Western Hockey League. Big kid, to say the least, 6'4", 6'5", depending on the different measurables there. Already well over 200 pounds though, and probably going to add more when you look at his frame and kind of look at where he's at right now, which is scary to think about. But big kid, and of course, his father, Vern Fiddler, played for a long time in the National Hockey League, over 800 games as a center. Most people probably remember him with the Dallas Stars and kind of what he did there. And really biggest highlight for me, RJ, when I think of him, is when he was kind of mocking and making fun of Kevin BX out there on the ice, and then the Vancouver coach Lane Vigneault
Alain Vigneault.
just
Yeah.
losing it with the giggle fits on the bench. All time NHL highlight right there.
It's great. Yeah. If you haven't seen it already, but I think it's been posted a lot in Kraken circles already after that draft pick was made. But yeah, go take a look. Alain Vigneault, usually pretty straightforward button down type of guy on the bench. He's not one to get caught in a laughing fit, but that one was just too funny. So great moment. And I mean, I remember Vern Fiddler is kind of a staple in the NHL. He played from, 0203 to 16-17. And Dylan, I mean, that's right in the middle of our
Yep.
formative hockey fan years growing up. This one was a little bit of a feels old kind of moment, right? I mean, don't you feel a little old? You remember Vernon Fiddler playing with him in all the NHL
Yep.
video games and everything, and now we're watching his son at Def Camp.
Yeah, it is pretty crazy. They also look a lot alike too, like so that's part of
Mhm.
it too. Is like you're just like, whoa, wait a second here. But yeah, no, it is definitely a feels old moment for sure. But the player here that the Kraken are getting, Blake Fiddler, first off, just be moving up in the draft to get him, because this was a move that required a decent, changing of assets at the draft. The Kraken move up. They had the sixth pick in the second round. They move up two spots with Philadelphia to pick fourth in the second round to get Blake Fiddler. And to do so, RJ, they not only moved that sixth pick to move up the two spots, but they had another second round pick later in the round. I think it was 57th, and they exchanged that with the Flyers for their third round pick. So Kraken committing substantial assets just to move up two spots to ensure that they get their guy. And without even getting into the player, I just love that Jason Bottrell's the kind of general manager to do that. Like if you have conviction, especially at the top of a second round, somebody maybe fell out of the first round, whatever. I love just going for it, right? Your scouting staff's like, hey, this guy is substantially better than anybody else on the board. And you're just like, you know what, then I'm going to go and get them. Like I really liked seeing that for the Kraken, because Ron Francis isn't really known for wheeling and dealing along those lines.
No, not really. I mean, he would keep most of the picks that he had. Certainly anything high in the draft, the Kraken were kind of stuck in their spot. And I think this time it was necessary as well if he wanted to get the player, because there were a number of defensemen that fell out of the first round. And you started to see a run on them too. I mean, right
Hmm.
before this, you had Simon Wang go to San Jose. You had Jacob Rombach, who I would have liked to see there. And I was like, oh, there's another one off the
Hmm.
board that I wanted to see Seattle get. You want to get a big defenseman. And you could tell there was a run on those type of players. And Bottrell didn't sit back and wait to see if, oh, maybe he'll fall another two picks to us. He went and traded up. Make sure you leave the draft with that player. And I don't think you're all that concerned about the difference between a late second and an early third. Normally, I don't like these trades because you never get good value on them as far as like the picks you give up. But this is a case where I think you probably don't get this player if you don't trade up, and you're left with somebody considerably worse.
Exactly. I had Blake Fiddler 21st on my board. I had him very solidly as a first round talent. I'm a big believer in his. And obviously, he has the size, right? Like 6'5", 220, huge size, lots of strength as well. great physical defender, the kind of guy who loves clearing guys out in front of the crease, really forces other teams to have to play to the outside. His transition defense needs some work. He's not the strongest backwards skater. We kind of saw that today at Dev Camp in the first look with him. But he's also the kind of guy that, because of his size and his strength, when he sees that a play is going in one direction, and let me tell you, he absolutely sees where the play is going because his instincts are impeccable. He's able just to put one foot in the ground, one skate in the ice, make one push, and close any gap because he is just so strong and so powerful in that lower body. And so any deficiencies he maybe has defending the rush, he's very able to make up for them with that first move. And then the thing that I really liked about him, and I thought that maybe some teams would see, and maybe it would cause him to be a first round talent, or it should have caused him to be a first round talent, is I think the offensive side of his game doesn't get talked about enough. I really, really like when he has the puck at the blue line. I think he's very poised with it. He's not somebody who's going to just kind of quickly make a decision or feel rushed if he has a forward coming at him, because the bottom line is he's like twice their size usually, especially in the Western Hockey League right now, and he just kind of brushes them off and he'll hold on to the puck. But he's got great lateral movement up there at the blue line. He loves looking for a shooting lane. He'll go out and find a shooting lane. He's not going to wait for one to develop. He's going to go find it. And then his shot is, it's maybe not the biggest bomb out there, but it is one that is extremely heavy, and it's one that just goalies have a really hard time handling. And so he had 10 goals last year playing for the Oil Kings. I think that that's a number that can improve as he starts shooting the puck a little bit more, as he works onto the offensive side of his game, because the D is already so strong. But I think it's one of those shots that I see at the NHL level, him finding those shooting lanes, throwing shots on net, and then those being shots that, yes, if they're not going to go straight in, are going to create some big juicy rebounds for Seattle Kraken players to be able to go out there and try to bang home.
Yeah, and I was impressed today just watching him walking the blue line and how natural he looked doing that for someone his size and his age. It just, that stood out to me for one thing. And also, he's the kind of player that if he develops into what you hope he can be, that's a really valuable piece, like a right
Mhm.
shot defenseman, even if he's just a top four kind of guy. We just saw somebody like this, and you can tell me if you think the comp is off because I haven't run this by you first, but somebody like Michael Kesselring, who was
Mhm.
just traded to Buffalo in the JJ Paterka trade, and like the kind of player that a guy like that could command going back the other way. Like teams covet that kind of player.
Oh, they absolutely do. No, I don't think that comp's like out of the realm of possibility at all. You mentioned age, still only 17. Blake Fiddler, he turns 18 in 8 days, so
That was a theme in this
it
draft
really
class, by the way,
was.
for Seattle.
It really was. They were taking the guys kind of born a little bit later. I'm generally in favor of that. I think it just means that those guys have more time to develop, particularly in a draft like this. A Blake Fiddler versus some of the other defensemen in this one, you're talking about like a 9-10 month gap in some of these birthdays. That's almost a full extra year of development that, for these guys to get better when you're judging them at this age. If you think they're close at all, give me the guy who basically has a full other season's worth of development still to go. I just think that that was a smart move from the Kraken as well, with a lot of their picks targeting these earlier birthdays. They're later
Yeah,
'07
earlier, later.
birthdays.
The younger players in the draft. And
Yeah.
by the way, the analytics would tell you that is a smart thing to do overall
Mhm.
if you can target the younger players. And so I do wonder how much the analytics staff maybe weighed in there as well. And, it shows, the analytics show that that is one kind of untapped area. A competitive advantage you can gain in the draft is by drafting younger players, as long as you're fine waiting for the development timeline. But it's going to be multiple years anyway, so why not?
Yeah, exactly. So I just think that those first two picks in particular, I like Will Reynolds. I like some of the other stuff that the Kraken did. We'll talk more about kind of all those prospects kind of after Dev Camp. Certainly the big prospect chat that I'll have later this month on Patreon after Dev Camp and everything. We can really break everybody down. But those first two picks from the Kraken, being able to secure somebody that I had, I believe, sixth in Jake O'Brien overall, and then 21st overall, and being able to do it the way they were doing it, I just thought was a fantastic steal for Jason Bottrell, and made going to that pretty awfully formatted draft worth it, RJ.
Yeah, I'd say so. I think it was worth it at the end of the day because the Kraken did well. And overall, I mean, really, I think their whole history as an organization, their draft process has been solid. That's one
Mhm.
thing I think they've always tended to do really well. The rest of it, maybe not so much, but the draft, I think they've really done a good job with their process.
Yeah, I was talking with Curtis of Sound of Hockey earlier today at Dev Camp, and you just look out at all of the guys out there, right, at Dev Camp, and the fact that you can look at players that this team has taken in the seventh round, sixth round, all these later rounds, and you're just like, wow, that's a kid whose fundamentals are like completely solid. He can think, he can play with speed. Like, yeah, is he going to be an NHL player? No, probably not, but I'm looking at a whole bunch of guys that at the very least are going to be AHL players. Like this is just a team that drafts guys that are going to be able to play at a next level, right? Maybe not the NHL level, but a next level. And that to me tells me that they know what they're doing because every so often one of those later round guys is going to turn into somebody who can contribute at the NHL level. And that's one of the biggest wins. We've already seen it with some of their undrafted guys, Ty Cartier coming in and being able to contribute at the NHL level. Somebody who was qualified the other day, by the way. So we'll see. We'll
Yeah.
talk about that in just a little bit. But this Kraken scouting staff, and then obviously on the player development side, once they're within the organization, they're just able to turn out so many good-looking prospects, and I think that that's a big deal for a young organization like this one. That's really impressive, and it tells me that not only does the team commit the resources necessary for that to happen, but they committed those resources in the right people.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, I think whether it's the scouting staff or the analytics staff, because they have a lot of, I mean, everyone thinks of the analytics staff when you look at, when you look at players you bring in via trade or free agency and all that kind of thing. And we'll talk about like Ryan Lindgren and maybe the analytics not looking so good there, right? That's when we talk about it most often, but there's a lot of the analytics that goes into the amateur side as well. And I think with the Kraken, with Namita Nandakumar, Danny Chu, people like that working on the amateur side, from an analytics perspective, I think it really does pay off.
Yeah, definitely. So, really excited about all this. Excited that we still have 2 days worth of dev camp to go to. And by the way, if you're listening to this tonight on July 1st, Kraken let us know today that tomorrow, July 2nd, will be open to the public and you could come and show up and watch dev camp out there with us. I do like that change of heart from the franchise. I wish they gave people a little bit more notice, though.
That would be ideal. And yeah, I wasn't thrilled with the decision to close the first 2 days of dev camp to the public. And I think a lot of fans felt the same way. But I mean, I do want to give some credit to where it's due to the Kraken
Yep.
because this shows, and we can tell you from, the slightly more inside perspective that we have, they heard you.
Hmm.
You let them know what you think about it. They listened, they heard you, and they changed. So I want to give credit to the Kraken because not every organization would change it that quickly too. Maybe think, oh, well, maybe next year we'll change it back. But day two is open. So I'd love to see a lot of you go tomorrow. It's a great time at Dev Camp. And I just, kudos to the Kraken for making that change. I think it was the right thing to do.
Yeah, definitely. All right, RJ, let's talk big picture. Let's talk the actual Kraken roster, right? Because outside of maybe Berkeley Catton, nobody from this dev camp is going to be wearing the Kraken sweater come this fall. Oh boy, where do we even start, right? We've got the Frederick Gaudreau trade. We've got a Joe Veleno buyout. We've got the news that Grew is hanging around for another year. And then, of course, we have the two free agent signings from today. We go in chronological order, or you got some method to this overall madness that we're looking at?
Man, I mean, I think we could go chronological order. I still want to start off big picture and we kind of narrow into how everything
Hmm.
fits into it because going into the off season, I talked about this a little bit on the Armchair GM stream and even on the last podcast. What were we saying last week, right? The Kraken need to make a decision as far as what they want next season to look like. Do you want to make a serious push for the playoffs or do you not? Do you want it to be more of a transition year? And I think they've gone with the latter. And I think all of the moves they've made, all the ones that they're going to talk about, kind of fit into that plan of this being a transition year going forward. And so I think it's important to look at everything in the context of, well, in the context of the plan, but I guess I was going to qualify it by saying in the context of what I'm guessing is the plan,
Yes.
because they won't flat out tell us, but we kind of have to piece this together with clues. But I think that's just a good place to start in that so far from the offseason, they've done a lot of individual things, but as far as, moving the needle entirely, as far as being a better team or not, this looks like it's setting up for a transition year where they're roughly the same level of skill they were last year.
Yeah, I think so. I think that that's a fair way of putting it. I think from, we kind of had the discussion beforehand, right? Like, is this team better than last year's team on opening night. Like if nothing else changes, and it feels like a pretty lateral move. I think where this team and this group could potentially be better is on the culture side of things, and if they're just more consistent with it, even if they're slightly less skilled than last year's squad, if they're just consistent and they come out and they compete each and every night, I think you could end up seeing a better result in the standings than what last year's squad was able to do. But it really does feel like that is what this year is for. It's retooling the roster, it's rebuilding the culture, and stuff on that side of things. It's given some young guys a chance, right? Like hopefully Shane Wright gets more of a chance this season. We'll see about Berkeley Catton or Yanni Newman. I think that they're kind of it seems like they're leaving a spot open on this roster for a young guy to fill. We'll see kind of who that ends up being. But Jason Botterill kind of talked about it today. He's big on having competitions come training camp. We're seeing that right now with just lots of guys kind of competing for certain spots at really all three levels: forwards, defense, and in net. And I just think that that's kind of what they're going for, is like, let's have guys that want this. They're going to go out and seize it, and then they're going to go out there in the regular season and have that mentality. And let's kind of fix that, because that team culture, RJ, is a lot easier to fix, particularly in a rough free agent market year like this one, a rough offseason like this one, where everybody is trying to buy, nobody's really selling. You're not really going to be able to massively overhaul your roster from a skill standpoint. Let's focus on the culture. Let's get the culture right. Let's get a certain level of compete and consistency out there. And then we can start working on that skill side of thing. And we'll start seeing those bigger and bigger improvement increments.
And we hinted at that a little bit on the podcast last week about fixing the culture being a goal when we previewed players they could bring in, guys that kind of help fix the culture and are good for the room. That's the type of target we were looking at rather than high-end skill players, because I think we both agreed that the hole that Ron Francis put this team in from a skill perspective is too deep to be dug out of realistically in one off season, and particularly this one where it's the most extreme sellers market I've ever seen in an NHL offseason. So the timing isn't very good there. But I think if you are going to do a transition year, your goals are first and foremost develop the young players, and number two, fix the culture. Like those are your top two goals. And so I think as we see the moves that happen, I think we can get into now the decisions that have been made, the moves they've made, the moves they haven't made, and kind of see how it fits into all of this. And then at the end, we can debate and discuss, is that a good idea or not? Is that the wise path to go on? And what does that really mean for Kraken fans next season? Like, what can you expect and what is this realistically going to look like? But I think the biggest tell for this, and I said this on the podcast last week, is the decision not to buy out Philip Grubauer. So Jason Botterill, the GM, came out and said, we're not going to buy out Grubauer. He's going to be part of the goaltending tandem next year. And I think this is the biggest indicator of a transition year, because if you are making a serious playoff push, I'll repeat myself from last week, you have to have elite level goaltending, high end goaltending from both of your goalies. I don't think you have enough margin for error to make a playoff push work without that. And for better or worse, Philip Grubauer has shown he cannot give you that. He can maybe be serviceable, but he can't give you elite goaltending. And so I think that right there kind of rules out any realistic path to the playoffs, combined with the lack of other moves. But I think that's kind of the big tell. Dylan, like, do you mind that decision to keep Grubauer around?
I don't, as long if assuming that you are thinking that this is going to be something that's going to take more than just one off season, I don't mind it, right? The buyout next year is a lot easier to stomach than a buyout this year, so you're going to save money in the long run against the cap. I think it's one where, we saw what Collins Villanella, new Kraken goaltending coach, did with Philip Grubauer last year, and all of the positive things that Philip Grubauer had to say about him. Might as well kind of see if you can get Grubauer going at the NHL level again. You made that goaltending change with this in mind. You might as well see that through. But it's one of those things where, yeah, I think that if playoffs are your priority, you're probably doing something different. I'm okay with playoffs not being the priority, as long as the team is just better, right? Like the team is more consistent, the team is trying harder, the team is competing harder, they can make adjustments during games, right? As long as there is positive momentum for this team, I think that that's a good thing, and I think that that's realistically what fans should be rooting for, rather than immediate overall team success. just be involved in like March, right? Like these are the things that we really just kind of need to see from this group, and that I think are most realistic and probably best for them long term from an expectation standpoint for next season. And I think this move for Philip Grubauer kind of works with that. But you know, Grubauer, I would just love to see like a 900 save percentage. Can we
I
get
think
that?
that's that might be too much to ask. I don't know. But I would love to see it. I'm not holding my breath on that. I think again he can be serviceable, but I mean it seems like given the overall plan, if it is a transition year, it's win-win because if he does turn it around a little bit, then great, you've got some good results. It's a good reclamation project, and who knows, maybe next offseason you can even retain some money and
And
move
move
him
him.
to a team if he's serviceable. And if not, you know what, he gets you maybe a percent or two better odds for Gavin McKenna, and in the long term, that's a very, very good thing for you. So I don't think it's a problem. And by the way, I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but you did kind of get a contingency plan in net
Hmm.
today in Matt Murray that I think will help a lot with that.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that this whole situation is fine around him. I think this is good.
Yep. So moving on then, next, I hope I'm getting this in chronological order. I think I am, is the Freddie Gaudreau trade.
Mhm.
So the Kraken acquire Frederick Gaudreau from the Minnesota Wild for a fourth round pick in the draft that just happened, the 2025 NHL draft. And so Freddie Gaudreau, he is a fourth line center. It looks like he's going to slot in as the Kraken's 4C if we kind of project the lineup out, but he's a very high end fourth line center who I think did play on the Wild's first line at various times last season. So he's kind of that third line, fourth line tweener, but he is a center. Put up 37 points last season, including 18 goals, which is second highest total of his career. So he's got hands. He's a finisher. His finishing talent is very good. He's 32 years old, so he's kind of on the decline side of the aging curve, and he's under contract for 3 more years at 2.1 million. So there is some term there, but Dylan, this trade, it bolsters their bottom six. And as far as the on ice fit, because we can talk about the cap implications and the roster building stuff, which I am a stickler for. So
Yes.
we will get there. But as far as an on ice fit, this seems like exactly the kind of fit for the roster and the culture that Lane Lambert and Jason Bottrill are trying to build, right? He's defensively responsible. He's got a little bit of scoring punch, and he seems like he's a great guy in the room.
Exactly. This just fits so in line with like the Mason Marchment move, right? And the trade there for this team. Somebody who's going to go out there and have a very consistent compete level. And I know it sounds like I'm just repeating like the same thing, but consistency is what this team needs. And so I'll be consistent with my language with it, right? They needed consistency. They needed compete. They needed guys to go out there and want it each and every night. We are so far removed from that season one, season two team that felt like, they were the Goonies. They never said die. They went out there and they tried each and every game and they were able to come up with some comebacks. That team hasn't existed these last two seasons. That has not been what this group has given. And I think bringing in a Frederick Gaudreau, somebody who can really stabilize that bottom six for you, right? Especially on that fourth line, help get you back to a fourth line that's going to go out there and definitively win battles, right? They're going to be better than other teams' fourth lines because I can't really think of any other fourth line center as good as Frederick Gaudreau out there. And be able to hopefully score a little bit for you. He'll be able to help out any young players that are potentially down there, but just bringing that effort level, bringing that compete to practices, to morning skates, and forcing other guys to have to play at that level just against him when you're just facing off against your own team, I think is going to be really important for them. Somebody who can also play on both special teams as well. I think bringing in another person who can penalty kill, somebody that can maybe means that Chandler Stevenson doesn't have to do it, I think is a positive thing for this group as well, and we shouldn't overlook that. And yeah, he's a fourth liner. He would have been top 10 on this team in points last year. He would have been top 6 on this team in goals last year with 18. Like, I don't think we can discount the fact that just adding another, somebody who's going to be a depth piece and play like 12, 13 minutes a night for this group, but is going to be a substantial contributor kind of compared to the rest of the skill level on this team.
Yeah, and he did play both special teams, not just PK, but also got some
Mhm.
power play time in Minnesota. So he's a versatile player there. And by the way, if you're frustrated about the Kraken's shootout failures in the past, he is a shootout ace, one of the best shootout players in the NHL. So he brings that as well. And so I was critical of this trade when it happened because you look at the term on the contract, right? 3 years left at 2.1 million. That's pretty steep for a fourth line player. Generally, just philosophically, I think that most teams should have a fourth line full of players making at or near league minimum, preferably your own prospects, but players that aren't being paid very much so you can spend that money elsewhere. It is inefficient to have a $2.1 million fourth line center. And so that part was bugging the armchair GM part of my brain. And I mean, you even look at Florida, Cup champ, right? Their whole fourth line making at or near league minimum. Like it's efficiency that you want. But this doesn't bother me as much. You talked me into it because in the situation the Kraken are in, they're going to have plenty of cap space this year. They can afford to be a little inefficient with it. They're not spending to the cap, I don't think. Next year may be a little different, but you're going to have a ton of cap flexibility. And also, you're probably going to have a use for, if you're trying to be competitive, you're going to have a use for a good fourth line center like Freddie Gaudreau. It's like a, cheaper Brandon Tanev, but actually who has scoring ability and can play center and can play both special teams and maybe is better in the room. Like it's all of those things at once. And, at 2.1, it's not that bad. So you've talked me into it. I think it is a good move.
You look at what other fourth line centers are apparently getting in places like Edmonton, RJ, and it's half that much.
Well, yeah, don't do that.
I should
don't give the Trent Frederick contract. Yeah, no,
that contract is a choice.
A lot of contracts are going to look good compared to that one.
Yeah. But yes, I'm with you, right? Like it is a lot for them to invest in a fourth line center, but I think that it shows kind of what this team was valuing this offseason, what they really feel like needs fixing and what they feel like they can fix. And I think that this trade and acquiring a player like Freddie Gaudreau really does that for you. And I think that, yes, long term, one of two things can happen. You either are in a spot where you don't really need him anymore and he'll have some value. He's going to have positive value and you can maybe move him. Or you're in a place where the team is now more competitive and having somebody like that on your fourth line is going to help you make the playoffs and help you maybe do something in the playoffs. So I think, yes, the term maybe, people thinking that it's going to clog up the middle of the ice even more than it already is for the Kraken. I don't realistically think that it's going to in the next 2 years. Maybe that last year of the contract, that third year of the contract, maybe that becomes something from like a Julius Mietnin or Oscar Fisker-Molgaard kind of coming in and learning that bottom six center role that they're going to probably have long term for the Kraken. But I think that this is one that you're going to be able to move out if needed, and if not, just have continue to be a solid contributor for your group.
You also convinced me a little bit on that he's not blocking too many young players, because that was my other big concern. It's like, how does this fit into giving young players opportunity? But as a center, the Kraken don't have anybody young who's ready to be 4C right now. Berkeley Catton is not going to be your 4C. He shouldn't be developmentally. He's probably going to move out to the wing and play higher up in the lineup. Really, Fisker-Bolgaard, I think, is the next one that would be coming up. And even then, that's a little bit in the future. So you talked me into that. What I don't want him to do is block like a young player, like say Matty Beniers from PK time.
Yeah.
But we'll see if we get there. That's my concern that still exists, but overall it's not too bad.
Again, should be blocking Chandler Stevenson. I know. What we need to do is
Stevenson shouldn't have been blocking Shane Wright last year, but look what happened.
I know. We need to pull off some sort of like CIA level MK Ultra, just like mind warp on penalty kill coaches across the NHL, that the thing that determines your depth chart for the PK shouldn't just be seniority. It should actually be defensive ability, because I just genuinely don't think that any of them get that.
I think there's a correlation of, veteran player, responsible, good penalty killer, but it's probably overstated in coaches' minds, I think. And also, I mean, just like Matty Beniers specifically, he's one of the best defensive players in the league already. So he should be on there. But anyway, so that's the Gaudreau trade. I think we're both generally okay with it.
Yeah.
And then with that comes a corresponding move, and that is the Kraken buyout. It's their first buyout in franchise history. So that's a little bit of history there. If you had asked me a few months ago, who's going to be the first buyout in franchise history? And by the way, it's coming this offseason. Joe Veleno would not have been the name I would have given you. I would have given you a couple different names for sure, including maybe the guy that Veleno was traded for. But this kind of completes the Andre Burakovsky trade, where previously on the last podcast, we talked about the Kraken trading Andre Burakovsky for Joe Veleno, 1-for-1, straight up deal. They rid themselves of the Burakovsky contract. And this was, I think, always a possibility and maybe the direction they were always going to go with this because Joe Veleno is such a cheap buyout candidate. Because he's under 26 years old, you can buy him out for 1/3 of his salary instead of the normal 2/3. And so the Kraken do elect to do that, get the cap flexibility. There was no space for Veleno anyway as a 4C because you brought in Gaudreau. So he'll have a cap penalty from the buyout of $796,000 this season and then $296,000 roughly next season. That's almost nothing. This season, it's just a little bit over league minimum. Next season, it's just a fraction of league minimum. Shouldn't really make much of a difference. And so effectively, they've rid themselves of the Burakovsky contract for almost no cost. Jason Botterill masterclass.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's an incredible move. I think best move that he's made so far, and I think he's made a lot of good moves. Really showing that if you're a general manager who can get a little creative, you can find your way out of difficult situations. And I think that this shows that, picking Jason Botterill as the next person up to be general manager for this team, it's a good call. Good call.
Yeah, certainly so far with the Burakovsky trade, that is a big win for the Kraken. And so kind of completed with the Veleno thing. Don't need to worry about that anymore. Now we can move on to the news from July 1st. And Dylan, going into today, I did not think the Kraken would be busy at all. I figured I think I told you, I thought it'd be one signing, nobody important, that big or whatever, nobody over $1 million or anything, right? Just one small signing. But we actually did get one fairly significant signing that caught us all by surprise. Because if we did get a signing, right, we kind of anticipated a forward. But the Kraken sign a defenseman. They signed Ryan Lindgren, previously with the New York Rangers most of his career, and then Colorado Avalanche briefly, to a 4-year deal, $4.5 million AAV on that, $4.5 million cap hit. So Dylan, I mean, this was a head scratcher at first.
Mm-hmm.
The more we thought about it, we kind of were able to explain it a bit. But I know, Dylan, I mean, we got to address the elephant in the room here. There was a lot of online backlash to this deal, especially after, say, the JFresh player card came out with Ryan Lindgren in the 0th percentile for projected wins above regulation. So that looks rough.
Yeah.
That does not look good. And look, I think this is a bad value signing. There's really no way to get around it. This comes out at above the projected contract for Lindgren as well. But I think we're in agreement on this. And I can't believe we are, because I feel like we would normally be the first people to trash a bad signing. But we don't hate this as much as you all might think. Dylan, let's start explaining why.
It really it feels like we're in the Upside Down or something, right?
I can't believe it.
Because normally we're raging against the Chandler Stevenson contract for a player that is at 0% WAR, right? According to JFresh, and there's a bunch of people online defending it, and then here we are, a bunch of people are pointing that kind of stuff with Ryan Lindgren, and we're going to turn around and defend it to a point. Right? To be clear, we're going to defend this to a point. I think the big thing is, look, this is another left-handed shot. He's going to be playing on the left side. This is a defenseman who is capable of eating a lot of minutes. He's going to be a top 4 role on the Kraken, most likely. And all of this points to Jamie Alexiak getting moved, which is something that, going back to last trade deadline, we felt was something that was possible. And I think that we're going to have to ultimately judge this free agency signing based off of what that corresponding move with, I mean, it doesn't have to be Jamie Alexiak, but with most likely what the Jamie Alexiak move is going to be. He's most likely to be the person that gets moved to make room for Ryan Lindgren. But I think when you look at that kind of as the whole, and if you're like, okay, we're going to move out Jamie Alexiak for whatever, and then Ryan Lindgren is the replacement. Lindgren is several years younger. He costs less. He's got term, and he's the kind of guy, because of his hashtag warrior, hashtag grit, right? He's got value. He will always have value. There is always going to be a borderline playoff team that's going to want to add a guy like this at their deadline and be like, hey, let's go. Let's make a run. We need this warrior out there. I think that all of that is positive, right? Give me a younger guy, a guy who's going to play more physical, who's going to defend the net front probably better than Alexiak ever has with the Kraken, somebody who's going to really be a good secondary guy behind a Brandon Montour on a pairing and kind of pick up those things defensively that just Alexiak really struggled with last year playing with him. And I think that you give me all of that, cheaper deal, I'm fine.
And I think it's important to dive a little bit more into the type of player that Ryan Lindgren is and just who exactly he is. So he's 27 years old. He's left shot defenseman. I think he has played the right side in the past. But the thing I think about with him is, and the immediate thing that comes to mind is like what you talk about, hashtag grit, hashtag warrior, because oh my goodness, I have never like of all the players in the NHL, if you were to ask me to associate which player do I associate with just taking punishment, just getting absolutely beat up, putting his body on the line, sacrificing his body for the team, Ryan Lindgren is right up there near the top of the list.
Mhm.
And he is only 27, but he is like the oldest 27 you're ever going to find as far as just the miles and the wear on his body. And I say this not even as a negative thing. I mean, I'm sure it'll take its toll eventually, but he's the kind of guy that coaches love because he's going to go all out and take a big hit to make a play. He's going to dive in front of a shot. He's going to block a shot with his face. He's going to do everything he possibly can to help his team win. And that's really the book on him. And by the way, from all accounts I hear, good in the room as well.
Mhm.
We talk about culture. This is another culture signing. And so if you put it in the big picture of, look, if you're not trying to necessarily be a playoff team right away, this kind of helps you fix the culture. And if you are just swapping him for an Alexiak, which again, that hasn't been done, but we can talk about it in a little bit. Like this means somebody has to be moved out. And I think it's got to be Alexiak. You look at it and he's younger, he's cheaper, as you said, and he's going to defend the net front better. That's an upgrade, at least, in the current role of just being a third pairing defenseman. And the number one reason I don't hate this contract as much as some others, again, I still want to preface this is a bad signing.
It's a bad,
Like, it's still not a
yes.
good signing. Like, this is a bad signing. Don't get me wrong. But I think he is always going to have some value out there to other teams because of the toughness he brings. And that's always going to give you an off ramp to this contract. Like, I compare it a little bit different, totally different type of player, but like to Brian Dumoulin when the Kraken signed him. I was thinking, oh man, this kind of term, this could be trouble, right? At that kind of money. If this goes bad, good luck getting out of that contract. And they got out of it just fine. Even got an asset from the Ducks to give up Brian Dumoulin because it didn't end up working. And so I feel like it could be similar situation here with Ryan Lindgren. Like there's always going to be teams that are going to want what he brings, even if it is overvalued compared to what he actually brings.
Right. And for so many years now, right? We've been doing post-game lives, we've been monitoring Discord, seeing everybody talking on Twitter, all of that kind of stuff. The common thread around Jamie Alexiak has always been, why isn't he more physical? Why isn't he, banging guys around? Why isn't he clearing out the net front? Why isn't he doing, X, Y, and Z? And I have defended him in, terms of that's never been who Jamie Alexiak has been. So stop having those expectations. Just because he has the size that he does not mean that he's a physical player, and that's just never who he has been. And he's not going to magically turn into that at 31 or however old he is. Ryan Lindgren is that player, right? The player that you've wanted Jamie Alexiak to be, Ryan Lindgren is. And so I think that that is something that the Kraken have needed. I would like it to be somebody who also can contribute positively beyond just being a physical presence, who can just kind of make sure that nobody's going to post up in front of Joey Decord and take away his eyes. But if you're looking at like kind of those two being the options, give me Ryan Lindgren. Give me the guy who is going to be more physical. Give me the guy who is going to be the warrior out there. Give me the guy who is going to force teams to have to play to the outside a little bit more, or not be in a position to put home a rebound, something that happened all the time last year with the Seattle Kraken squad. So I think like it is an upgrade in that regard, having Ryan Lindgren around. The other thing that I've seen in regards to this, and I talked with some people on Discord about it earlier today that were worried about it, is the idea that he is blocking people from an NHL spot with the Seattle Kraken. He's not. There is no great
Oh,
defenseman on the horizon for the Seattle Kraken, right? Like that is not that's why they took so many in this draft. Like that has been the weakest part of their prospect pool, has been on the blue line, and there's nobody really that ready for it, right? Viljo Tavainen is the most ready, and even still you're talking about a ceiling of a third pairing defenseman there. And so Ryan Lindgren, I know there was some worry about the term of 4 years and that blocking people down the road. We are minimum 2 to 3 years away from somebody like a Caden Price, a Blake Fiddler, Ty Nelson, or whoever from being able to really ascend to be a potential top four option for this team. And if that happens 3 years from now, when Ryan Lindgren only has 1, maybe 2 years left on his contract, and he's still, by the way, at that point, just like 30 years old, you can move him. It'll be a $4.5 million cap hit in a world where the cap is like $120 million. You'll be fine. Like it's really not a concern.
and that's what it all comes back down to for me is that just if at any point he is blocking somebody or you don't want him around, it's movable. And I really do believe this contract, even though maybe it shouldn't be to an extent, I believe it is movable, just given the way that NHL teams kind of tend to value this type of player. Now, one thing that does concern me though is because injuries, that could make it difficult to move or difficult to deal with, right? If he does have injuries that kind of stem from all the punishment that he's been taking, that concerns me a bit too, because it might not be the LTIR kind of injuries because he's
Hmm.
still young, but it could mean he could only play, 40, 50 games for you, but he's still taking up that space cap wise. And because of the injuries, teams might be more hesitant to trade for him or to get out of that contract. Could be a little tougher. So that's a concern I have. And then another one too is that, I mean, you look at, because like Lindgren, yeah, 0% war we're talking about, and just the really bad results last season. I mean, he was paired with Adam Fox with the Rangers and just completely tanked Fox's
Yeah.
numbers. That's not good, but there's reason to believe that hope that he could bounce back, because a couple years ago he was a really good, really productive defenseman that had a
Hmm.
good amount of value and played very well. And if he can get back to where he was a couple of years ago, I mean, this could be a steal for 4 years at 4.5 million, right? This is great. My concern though is that what I'm hearing from Rangers fans, again, I'll look into it more myself, I'll read more, but what I'm hearing early on from Rangers fans on social media is that he was a great player. We loved him. He was awesome on the blue line. By the way, he's great in the locker room and you're going to love him. But unfortunately, he's broken now. He's taken too much abuse, too much punishment, and he's just not himself anymore. That's what I'm worried about with this.
Yeah. No, and I
So,
think that that's a genuine concern. I would hope that the Kraken have done their due diligence and they feel like there's something there, and maybe they don't have to play him as much as the Rangers were, and being able to put him in maybe a different role, it's not as much of a concern. Playing in Lane Lambert's system, it maybe won't be as much of a concern. He's not going to be put in a position where he has to keep up with an Adam Fox out there, right, playing with the Kraken. Um, he's not going to be probably eating 20 minutes a night the way he was for the Rangers last year. They have other guys that can do that, right? Like Adam Larson can do that for the Kraken and be that kind of defensively minded guy out there to chew up that number one role for them. And I think that that's hopefully going to make a difference for him, and just that little bit extra, a couple minutes off each night over the course of an 82 game season, it really does add up as far as the amount of punishment on a player's body. So hopefully that's something that works. And then, yeah, just to kind of come back around, RJ, thinking of Lane Lambert, his systems, the reliance on defense, especially like kind of physical, real well structured defense. Again, I feel like Ryan Lindgren should fit in pretty good there and help provide a little bit more stability than, say, maybe a Jamie Alexiak does.
definitely. I think he's a better fit for the system. I mean, he's a fit on the ice. I think he's a fit off the ice in the room. And that seems to be a common thread with everybody they've brought in Marchment, Gaudreau, and Lindgren. So from that perspective, as Jason Bottra likes to say, it makes sense. And by the way, speak of the devil, I will speak of the Ranger. We are going to get Ryan Lindgren on Zoom for media availability tomorrow at 2:30. So everyone stay tuned to the social media and everyone check in to see the quotes from him.
Yeah, definitely. So again, we get it. It's not like the greatest signing in the world. It's maybe not even a good signing, but it is far from a disaster. It's far from like doom and gloom. And I get it that on a day where the Kraken only have two signings, and we'll get to the next one in just a second. This was not one that was going to move the excitement meter, particularly if, you're maybe a more casual fan. And you're hoping for the team to go out there and get a big time score, or somebody that you can really cheer for is going to really help this team get propelled to the playoffs next season. This just wasn't the offseason for it, right? Mitch Marner, Brad Marchand, they get taken off the board before free agency even starts. I mean, it's Nick Ehlers. Nick Ehlers and Gavrikov. These were like the two guys in all of free agency. And guess what? You had like 30 teams trying to go after them. The Kraken just realistically weren't going to be, in those conversations, I guess to say in those conversations with Nick Ehlers, who still hasn't chosen where he's going. It just, this is not where the Kraken are going to be able to really try to substantially improve this roster from a skills standpoint. That's going to have to come through a trade, maybe an offer sheet, but realistically a trade. And we'll see if Jason Botterill is able to do that during the offseason. I don't think it's the worst thing in the world to keep some cap flexibility, keep some assets, and start looking at something during the season, right? We've spent a lot of time talking about how this is an off season where there's like 30 GMs out there that kind of feel like they're on the hot seat and they need to be making moves. All these teams can't be buyers and try to stay really competitive 2-3 months into the season, right? Some teams are just not going to be in a spot where they can convince themselves that they're going to be a playoff team and they're one piece away anymore, and they're going to have to start selling. And if the Kraken find themselves in the wild card mix, they're going to have a lot of options to be able to go out there and buy at that point, and realistically probably be able to buy at value too.
Yeah, I think it's not the worst thing in the world to just kind of stand pat here and let the rest of the offseason come to you. And I think Botterill was pretty upfront a few days ago saying the free agent market, he put it as politely as he could, but essentially saying that it's not very good this year. And we're going to look at, if we're doing anything, it's via trade. So I think, fans were at least prepared for that, or a few days out, or they should have been. So, that makes sense to me. But going to the last free agent signing, it's certainly not, a big one that's going to move the needle, but I think it is a really smart, sensible signing. And that is Matt Murray. Yes, two-time Stanley Cup winner, Matt Murray. Dylan, who you have seen win the Stanley Cup clinching game in person in 2016 in San Jose, who was born the same day as you, Dylan.
Mm-hmm.
So that's going to be fun. You're going to get to see which one of you two is older. But the Kraken signed Matt Murray to a one-year deal at $1 million. And this really fits into the decision to keep Philip Grubauer.
Yeah.
With the decision to keep Grubauer, given how iffy he was last season, I think you do want a contingency plan and maybe a little competition for him as well if he doesn't, play well at the start of the season. So that's what Murray is for. This contract is under the amount of money that you can bury in the minors. So if they do want to send him to Coachella Valley, he's got to go through waivers, but they can do that. He won't cost anything to their cap. So it just seems like a sensible move to have another goalie around just in case Grubauer falters.
Yeah, exactly. And again, Matt Murray kind of like a tweener goalie at this point between the AHL level and the NHL level, I think is probably the most accurate way to describe it. But to his credit, he has come a long way from that last season in Pittsburgh, first season in Ottawa, where it was bad, right? Like there's no way to sugarcoat those two seasons. He has battled back. He has turned himself into somebody that can respectably take on NHL starts and hold down the fort for an NHL team there. And so, yes, if things go bad with Grubauer, there's an injury at some point, he will be able to come in and provide his services for the Kraken. And then also be able to be somebody at the AHL level that can, help mentor Nikai Koko down there, right? Like somebody who's going to be a veteran presence, somebody who has cup winning experience, somebody who's just going to be a good guy to have around at that level. Again, there's virtually no risk here if you're the Kraken. There's a 1-year term, there's $1 million. There's no downside.
Yeah, it's just a no-brainer type of deal. And by the way, I mean, as far as working himself back, Matt Murray, he led the AHL in save percentage last season, minimum 20 games, but .934 save percentage in 21 games at the AHL level. That's a pretty good sign. I think that he's at least somewhat gotten his game back. And so if you were going to just throw a dart, take a bet on any of these goalies out there in the free agent market, why not him? He seems to make the most sense. And of course, Bottrell, reunited there. They won 2 cups together in
Hmm.
Pittsburgh.
Yeah, exactly. So I like this signing a lot for them. I like that it's going to, lead to maybe a little bit of competition come training camp time in September. I think that that's going to be good for the group. So I'm all about this one.
Yep,
And you saw
definitely.
him
Yeah.
win a cup, by the way, in person too, or unless you've blocked that out of your memory.
I kind of have. I don't like to talk about that side of it. I've already talked with Brian Dumoulin about scoring the key goal
Yeah.
to sink the Sharks in that game. I'm sure I'll have to talk with Murray about that being in that game at some point too. But yeah, I try not to think about that. The only thing I've remembered is just looking at your happy, smiling face and your enjoyment, because that's the only positive that came out of that.
I was gonna say, I thought you were gonna say that's the only thing that matters. I was gonna say like, well, that's a choice, but yeah, that probably feels better. Yeah, no, but we'll be able to talk to him about yeah, out dueling former Kraken legend in net, Martin Jones.
I know. Yeah, I mean we had a lot of angles on that game. I mean, Jonas Donskoy was in that series as
Yep.
well, scored a massive overtime goal there. I mean, we could go on and turn this into a Red Glare episode, but we won't. Oh, what do you have?
It's just the game six puck from that draft there.
Ah, you got it put in a nice little frame and everything too. That's nice for the people on the video version. Picking up a puck from that game. How wonderful that all was. All right, let's
Yeah.
let's get back on the rails here, Dylan.
All right, all right. So looking at everything as a whole, we can kind of sum things up here. I mean, I really feel like what we talked about last week, right? Culture, getting things right there. That is what the retool of this offseason is for. That's what all these moves are built around. If you were able to make a bigger move, get a Jordan Kyrou, or maybe make another trade down the line here in the next couple of days, awesome. That's great. But it really feels like this was an offseason where Jason Bottrill went into it wanting to make the team tougher to play against, fit Lane Lambert's system a little bit more, but ultimately just be more competitive, have a higher compete level, and be more consistent.
Yeah, and I think all these moves have fit in with that plan. But I think we should talk about this a little bit too from another perspective, because I think so far throughout this podcast, we've done a really good job of talking to our regulars, kind of preaching to the choir,
Hmm.
people who are totally on board with the transition year and think that that's kind of the most sensible way to go about things. But looking at it on social media, and I know there's some regulars that are in this camp as well. I'm not discounting you, but I want to make sure to talk to you as well. People that saw the Jason Bottrill quote, because I was really trying to dig and see like, okay, are you done? Are you not done?
Hmm.
At the end of the day when we talked to him today. And so I asked him if, do you think the team's already done most of your offseason business, or do you foresee another significant move? And he said, you always want to do more business, right? You always want to continue, but no, we're happy with what we've done with the roster. And then went on to just kind of explain what they've done. And I think a lot of people kind of read that as like, we're done. I don't read it as definitively that, but I do just kind of think they're not really going to make another move to bring somebody in. This is more or less what we have. It might be an Alexiak trade to send him out, but I think it's worth discussing in terms of, because a lot of people in the comments put like, this is aggressive. This was the aggressive offseason you promised. Because Dylan, I think we both agree, this is certainly not an aggressive offseason. It has not been. Like you're roughly the same amount of good you were at the start of
Hmm.
last season, and you've made a few minor changes and things to fix the culture, but you're nowhere near a playoff team. And so I feel like Bottrell may be a victim here of some of the expectations that might have been set from certain interviews with ownership, but even himself as well, promising to be aggressive in free agency. Todd Lywicki talking about an aggressive offseason. We're going to bring in some big players here. Um, I guess question for you, Dylan. Like, what would you say to those fans who maybe are a little disappointed by that? Because I think it's fair given what the
It
messaging was,
is.
but I think the problem is the original messaging, not the path they're actually taking, which seems like the most sensible to me.
Agreed. That's basically where I'm at. I think that it is fair criticism given the expectations that these people put forward themselves. And to be fair to Jason Bottrill, when he's, you could say be aggressive in free agency, even 48 hours ago, it was a very different free agent market than what it ended up being today, right? Because as free agency got closer, a lot of teams realized, wow, there's not going to really be a lot of free agents. And so they worked harder on retaining the talent that they already had and just trying to run it back with them rather than going out there and testing the waters in free agency. And it really led to, I think, the worst like day of free agency coverage I can ever remember. Right? Like these were some sad free agency shows to watch on TV today. Like it was pretty brutal out there. And so, you know, I, I'll take not really doing too much in free agency today and not really being aggressive in it, given the state of the market and the fact that if you were aggressive in free agency today, it would have meant that you signed a lot of bad deals realistically. And so I will take
LA.
that. Yeah, exactly. You would look like LA. So I'll take Jason Bottrell not doing that. I think that yes, he maybe should have probably had a little bit more foresight to know that the market was not going to be good. Even if all of those retained players were to hit the open market, it was still going to be a bad free agency class. And so that was maybe not the place to do it. And in more recent interviews, he had kind of said more along the lines of, we're going to look to do things through trades rather than free agency. So I think that realization came around. As for like ownership and Todd Lewicki's a hype man, right? Like he that is who he is at his core. That is his personality. Everything is always positive. The outlook is always great. He is somebody who is very capable of having grand vision, seeing that grand vision come to fruition too. He has done such an incredible job as the CEO of the Seattle Kraken. Everything from the arena, the fan experience, all of these things, right? The really great approach to the season ticket holders that they've taken this off season and lowering those prices. Like Todd Lewicki is somebody who can see the big picture, kind of cook something up, see it come to fruition, and it's generally pretty good. But he's not the general manager, right? Like he is not involved in the player stuff. So I do think like in the future we should probably temper anything he says that's along those lines. He is somebody who wants the team to be good. He's going to give the team the resources it needs to be good, but he's not the one pulling those strings.
Yeah, I think that's a good lesson for us to learn and kind of take forward and everything. And well said. So I think it's just important to be realistic about kind of just what this is and what next season is probably going to be given the level of this roster. And I understand frustrations with, look, you just had 2 seasons where you failed to meet expectations. And now you're essentially, in a way, I think there's a lot to be gained from next season, but you're essentially going to have to throw away a third season in a row.
Mm-hmm.
You're essentially going to have to kind of burn that one before you can think about the playoffs again. And from a fan perspective, certainly, if I, season ticket member, I understand the frustration there, but I think it's the only real option they had after the position that Ron Francis and that roster building has put them in. I just don't think they really had another realistic option, and so I think it's going to be a tougher kind of climb out of it. I think you can do a heck of a lot more next off season to
Mm-hmm.
get yourself out of it. You can really, I'm so excited to see what kind of wheeling and dealing Bottrell can do with all the cap space and assets he's going to have a year from now,
Mm-hmm.
that off season, because it's going to be wide open. But this off season, I think this was just really the only course you could go. And I think even if you tried the other plan, it probably wasn't going to be good enough anyway to get you to a playoff spot and where you wanted to go. So I think, is it the best option? Are we going to be in for the most, fun season ever next year? Maybe not, but it's the best option that was available.
Right. And I do think because of the moves they made, the coaching hire that they made in Lane Lambert, the players that they have added to this group, been talking about it, right? I think it'll be more consistent. I think they'll be more competitive. That's going to lead to more watchable games, right?
Yes.
Like at the end of the day, you obviously want your team winning. You want your team to make the playoffs. You want to enjoy playoff hockey watching the Seattle Kraken. I'm telling you, you also, during those 82 games, your season ticket holder, you're going to 41 games, or half season ticket plan, you're going to 20, 21, 22 games. You want to see a team that's going to have effort out there each and every night. You want a team that looks like they've shown up ready to play. You want a team that looks like they can make adjustments and come out and stay competitive as the course of a game goes on. And I think that the moves that they have made this year should help them be that kind of team moving forward. And I think that that is a massive leap forward from what we have had to watch these last 2 seasons. So I do think it will be a better and more enjoyable experience going to Kraken games next season than what we've had in the past, even if they're maybe not necessarily winning 20 more games than they won last year.
Exactly. We had so much fun in those games where the Kraken gave a 60-minute effort and gave a really good team a good run for their money. Think of like the Florida games and stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
even if you didn't get the result and the win at the end of the day. That was a lot of fun. And I think it's going to continue to be a lot of fun next season. What we didn't like was when just from the opening puck drop, they did not show up. They go down 3-0, 4-0 early, and it's clear, yeah, we're just not giving effort tonight. We're just not even playing our game at all. That sucked. That was bad. But that's the kind of thing that all these moves are directly addressing.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think we're going to see a lot less of it.
Yeah, so I'm on board for that, and I would hope a lot of the fan base is too. I understand the frustrations. Like again, we've been around for it all too. Trust me, like we've seen it, we've talked about it. We're right there with you. But I think that Jason Bottrill has done the most with what he's been able to realistically accomplish without totally leveraging the future in a negative way. And I think that that's also something that needs to be taken into account. And I respect the restraint there, that, this could have gone a very different direction and been very bad very quickly.
For sure. So I'm definitely grateful for that, especially seeing a lot of the other signings around the rest of the league today. So I think we can all be thankful for that, that we're not doing what some of the other teams are.
Yeah. Last question for you, RJ, because this has also been something floated amongst certain members of the fan base. Is this all just a big stealth tank operation for Gavin McKenna?
I don't think so. I don't think that's the intention. But I will say that all the moves they've made would fit in with that sort of thing. I don't think it's the plan, but I don't think it looks all that different from how it would look if it was the plan.
Yeah, I think this is a setup that puts them in a position to get better and improve on all the things that we've talked about. And it's one that, there is like an outside 10-15% chance that everything hits. And you do have that season that Lane Lambert had with the Islanders a couple of years ago, and you get to like 92 points and maybe you sneak into the playoffs. I also think that, there's also a chance that you're going to be in the mix again as a bottom 10 team, and maybe the lottery balls fall in your favor this time.
Yeah. And if they do, all your problems are solved.
Instantly.
And I don't say that lightly. If
Yeah.
you get Gavin McKenna, it solves every single problem this franchise has, and you will be playing in cup finals in the next decade.
Yeah. Yeah. So really looking forward to kind of how the season shakes out. We'll see what other moves might be on the horizon for the Kraken, whether they're done or not. They're probably done, but they might not be. Won't speak in absolutes. Want to thank everybody.
We are attempting a deep dive, Curtis.
We really are. At it's 7:23 p.m. Like, go for it, bots. If you're listening and you want to really make us look like a fool, go for it. I give you full permission there. But want to thank everybody for listening and all the support with all these offseason podcasts. Really great response from everybody. Big numbers on those, lots of comments and everything. Love seeing everybody's thoughts as things have been going down. I'm sure today's podcast won't be any different. And then, of course, want to thank the law offices of Rico Tessendorf for sponsoring the podcast, as always, for being there, not just for us here, but being there for the Kraken, season ticket holder himself, Rico Tessendorf, and being there for all of the people of Seattle. And while we hope none of you ever need his services, the odds say at some point someone out there will be involved in an accident, whether on the road, at work, or anywhere in between. And when you are, we hope you call Rico at 425-778-9800 or visit his website, ricotessendor.com, to schedule a free consultation. He has won millions of dollars for his clients and helped thousands of people in the greater Seattle area. And as a fellow member of the ECH community, we know he'll help you too. Thanks for listening, everybody, and we will see you all next time.
Hey everyone, before we go, we just wanted to give a quick shout out to all of our awesome patrons over at patreon.com/Emerald City Hockey, especially our Terror of the Deep patrons.
Thank you so much for making all this possible. We really appreciate your support.